There it goes. Recording in progress. I love that voice. Sounds like Siri. Or Alexa now is a new word, I guess. So we're all set. We're good to go. You have a good day, Dana. Thanks for the intro. I don't see everybody else. I can't see other faces on the meeting, just you.
If you change your view to gallery, you should be able to see everybody.
That's what I thought I had. There you go. Yep, I missed that button. Cool. Hey, there's Emerald. And Marquise and Crystal. This is it so far, huh?
Yep. You may have a few more hop on, but
it's all right.
These ladies are ready to rock and roll.
Let's get started. It's after 9, so if some other people want to jump in, that's cool with me. We'll just get started as our little group, and one is enough to start a meeting, so we're good to go. So out of the three of you, I know what Emerald's experience is because I've been working with her on several things that she's got going on. Where do the two of you, let's start with Crystal. Have you done any buyer consultations or offers, or are you just kind of brand new to everything?
Brand new to everything.
Cool, that's great. And is it Marquise or Marquis?
It is Marquise.
Marquise. All right, Marquise, and what's your experience level at this point?
Probably somewhere in between.
Okay, cool.
Crystals. I've done them, but they keep falling apart, for one reason or another. So
welcome to real estate. and Emerald and I, we've talked quite a bit over the last several weeks. So she feels your pain. She knows what's going on back and forth. So as far as buyer consultations are concerned, setting the expectations is real important. And part of that is letting them know your availability. It's easy to say to someone, as a new agent, you have to set your expectations, say to people, and we'll say, I'm your buyer. So you would all say, hey, Michael, listen, love to work with you. Here's what I can offer. You're going to go through what Keller Williams offers, what you're offering. And as a new agent, I mean, you're saying to yourself, well, geez, what can I offer? I don't even know what the heck I'm doing. So what I tell the new agents would be, you're all part of a team. Now, you may be individual agents, but for your first year, you're really part of the KW coaching team at the Philadelphia office. That team I have 18 years, Sean has roughly, I think, 10, Dana's about the same. So we've got close to 40 years experience, and I don't even know how many millions of dollars the three of us have done together. I mean, I've done well over 70 million in my career so far. So you have that team behind you. So your experience level has to rely on the part of the team you belong to. So if someone finds out you're new, you say, yes, I'm new, but I'm part of a team that has all this experience and so forth. And I'm not going to be alone in this. From day one until we close, I have a coach and other team members behind me to answer questions and help if any issues come up. So rely on that team concept for now until you get enough experience and enough confidence that you don't have to do that. Once you do 2 or 3 transactions as a buyer agent, it will get easier. I'm talking about complete transactions, not you write an offer, it gets rejected because you didn't offer enough money or you didn't waive inspections. This is a very tough market for any agent, let alone a new agent, because it's a completely different market than I've ever seen or anyone on this planet has ever seen. I mean, I never thought I'd write an offer that would be waive the appraisal, waive the inspections, pay $50,000 over asking. Never thought that would ever happen. So it's a really wild West kind of market. And I think the good news is in the next year, that's going to settle down. I've noticed in Philadelphia, a lot of places where the properties are starting to come down in price. Once you start to see that trend, that means that the buyers are saying, hey, you know what? No more, I'm done. And they're just walking away. So what's going to happen is the seller is going to have to start bringing their prices back down to earth. And in the meantime, if mortgage rates start to creep up, that's going to start to level the playing field. So the biggest factor for a buyer today, and I've got like 3 potential buyers who just don't quite understand the concept. And I'm sending them information from other sources that aren't real estate related sources, maybe stock market sources or economists or so forth, that are saying that the next year real estate is going to go up anywhere from 4 to 16%. That's a pretty big, I think, we got someone here who wants to come in. That's a pretty big swing, I think. Let's see, view. admit. Sorry about the delay there. I had to admit a couple more people into the room. So here comes Kelly and Jennifer's coming in. Hello, Jennifer. Hello, Kelly. So she's still loading up? Nope. Hi, Jennifer. Okay, so that's a pretty big swing. So what I'm trying to let my new buyers know, even if they're existing, they own a property, they're waiting for the market to cool down. I'm sending them information saying, hey, there are all these sources telling us that prices are going to continue to rise on about an average of 10% over the next year, which is insane. It's not quite as insane as the last year, but you have to get creative and find ways to let buyers know waiting might not be the answer. If interest rates go up a point and prices only come down a little, they're going to wind up spending thousands of dollars more. So that's all part of your buyer consultation, finding out, you want to meet with them, find out their motivation, why do they have to buy? Where are they looking to be? What's their price range? And if they're saying, well, I just started looking, I'm thinking about moving in the next 12 to 18 months, you want to put them maybe in your warm folder. They say, I'm looking to move in the next 6 months, that's a hot lead. 6 months to a year right now is still considered a hot lead. So just find out what their motivation is, their timing is, tell them what you have to offer. And one of the important things is the buyer agreement itself, going through that in detail so that they understand what it is that they're hiring, who they're hiring, and what their expectations are from you. Because you want to set your goals and say, here's what we're planning on doing. I'm available from 9 a.m. till 6 p.m. And that's always something that we try to do, is try to set your schedule and get your clients to be on that schedule. But 9 times out of 10, a client's going to call you on 8 o'clock on a Friday night, and they're going to say, hey, I have a house that I have to see tomorrow at 7, and you're going to have to make a choice. That's outside of your guidelines that you already gave, but real estate generally happens at night and weekends. So you have to decide, am I going to try to reschedule that appointment for a time that is convenient for me, or am I just going to say, okay, hey, I'll show you the house. And I think that probably out of all of us here, including me, I'm probably going to show the house. You're going to go look at a $300,000 property paying 3% for $9 grand. Oh, gee, Emerald, I'd love to show you that house tomorrow at noon. But as I said before, Saturdays are bad for me. I can show it to you on Sunday. Phone's going to go click. They're going to call the next agent. So setting those expectations is really just trying to, and guidelines, it's really trying to hone them in a little bit. As a buyer agent, you're kind of at their mercy. And if you're new, you panic. It's just part of the gig, because you need income. So you take that rental lead last second, you take that buyer lead last second. The only thing I'll say about last second leads would be very careful when you get a call after dark. And someone says to you, hey, this is Joe Smith. I just saw this property. I saw your number online, and I'd like to see it. And it's like, after 4 o'clock, 4:30, now it starts getting dark. You don't know this person. God bless you. You don't know this person. It's after dark. Safety is a big thing. And it doesn't matter if you're male or female, if you're 4 foot tall or 8 foot tall. Safety is still an issue. And one of the things when you're showing a property that I've always done is you don't have to go into the basement when you're showing a house. You don't have to go upstairs when you're showing a house. You can go on the first floor, show them around. If they want to see the basement, turn the light on, let them go. You do not have to go down there. If you're for any reason feeling like that spidey sense where you're uncomfortable, don't go down. And on a last second appointment at night like that, what I always do too is I always text or call somebody. Hey, listen, I'm going to 123 Main Street. I don't know who this girl or guy is. I just want to know, want you to know where I am. And I'm going to call you within 30 minutes. If not, come get me. So it's sad to have to say all this, but safety is really, really important here. So if you feel comfortable and you do go down to the basement, don't go down first. Let the buyer go first. When you're coming up the basement, you're always behind the buyer, so they're always in front of you. That way, if you walk in front of them, they can just grab you from behind. So you always want to keep them in your viewpoint. Same when you're going upstairs and downstairs, you know, you have to be safe, which a lot of people don't talk about on these consultations, but I just think it's pretty important to, you know, the world's getting crazier and crazier every day. So just be safe out there. So I would say, is going through the buyer agreement itself more important for everybody to see? Who wants to go through the buyer agreement? Just raise your hand. Anybody want to go through the buyer agreement? You're all pretty comfortable with that. I see 2 hands raised and 3 hands not. Okay, cool. No worries. So Kelly and Jennifer, I'll ask Kelly first. What is your experience level to this point with buyers? Have you done any contracts or anything yet, Kelly?
I have not. I'm working with a seller, but I haven't had any buyer clients.
Oh, cool. You're working with a seller. That's awesome. And then Jennifer, I see you shaking your head. Okay.
No, yeah, I just started.
Okay, cool. So the buyer agreement on paper, when you look at it, it looks pretty harmless. It looks pretty straightforward, but there are a few tricky spots in that agreement. And our lawyer Herb will tell you if there's a blank, there should be something written there. And that's like 90% true. There are some spots on the agreement of sale or on a buyer agreement. If it's not applicable and you don't check it, then you can leave it blank. I'm trying to get in the habit of getting people, if it's not applicable, just put like NA. So at least so people know you haven't missed that particular line if you feel it's appropriate. So you're going to go through and you're going to put down the parties involved, which will be your client, you know, Joe Smith at Main Street, lives in Philly, 19121, or whatever the case may be. You're going to put Keller Williams information, name, address, phone number. You're going to have your email. On the buyer agreement, there's a spot where you can put the client's email and phone number, which I strongly suggest, because that's another record of that information in case some people paperwork gets lost. Some people don't put it in, but I would. The one thing that none of us are really putting in, and I think Herb, the attorney, would like us to, is there is a spot for the fax number. I couldn't tell you what the fax number was. I could look it up, but I don't know what it is, because who's using fax anymore? That's always blank on mine. That's my bad. Herb would prefer I put it in there, but that's nonetheless what it is. Have any of you, and we'll just do raise a hand, how many of you have watched Vicky's agreement of sale class?
Mike, I
Okay,
have a question real quick.
yeah, go ahead, Butler.
Are you actually looking at the screen right now for the buyer agency contract?
I am not, but if we have questions, we can certainly field those.
Okay, I was going to say, because you could share your screen, so then that way we could all see it.
Yeah, I don't have a contract up. I can go back and see if I can pull one up and go from there. Let's see. I don't see a picture for Robin, but I do see her name and a no speaker gizmo on there.
Hi, sorry, I can't, for some reason, my camera's not working on my laptop. I apologize.
That's okay. No worries. So I wish my camera didn't work so you wouldn't have to worry about looking at me. But
I'm trying here. It's not working.
that's okay. No worries. We shall all get through this. It's not a problem. Let's go to, I need to do a Keller Williams one in Pennsylvania. Got all these Delaware things going on here. It really doesn't matter which one I use. So let me get that to open up. My computer's being really slow today for some reason. I don't know why, but what I can do is I'm just going to go into command and I'm just going to pull up a blank one. If that's what you think will be easier to kind of, you guys want to go through it step by step?
Sure.
We can.
Okay.
I really had a question on
Sure.
broker's fee. When I was watching Vicky's video, that kind of threw me off when she got to that part.
Okay, so let's do a few questions and then we'll actually go through the document itself. So the broker fee, which was a conversation that Emerald and I had yesterday, on your contract you sign with Keller Williams, you see that, and everybody forgets this little piece. Every transaction that you do that's a buy sell, and I believe in the Philadelphia office, if you do a rental, I want to say if it's over 3,000, this applies as well, but generally rentals are less than that. So to the best of my knowledge right now, you have a $75, excuse me, transaction fee that you pay to Keller Williams on every deal you do. Then you also have the division of Keller Williams called Contract to Close, which would be Lauren, and I always forget the other girl's name. We're out in the Conshohocken. We have another person doing the conveyancing. So on a listing, so with Kelly having a listing, she may be using Contract to Close because there's a lot more that you have to do on that side. But we're going to focus on the buy side right now. So the Contract to Close part, if you want someone like Lauren to follow up on your timelines and make sure things are being done on time and so forth, she'll charge you, say, $200. I'm just going to round things up. So on that buy side, you're paying the broker, Keller Williams, and the conveyancing department, let's say $275. In our office in Conshohocken, Kevin and his team charge $600 as a broker fee. So that's over and above any listing commission that's being paid or commission being received on the buy side. So on the broker fee, you need to decide what you want to charge. Anything over and above the conveyancing fee that you're paying Keller Williams. Let's say you're going to do your own conveyance and you're going to pay Keller Williams $75, which is a transaction fee all of us pay on every single transaction, regardless of how much business you're doing. And let's say you do charge $600. Keller Williams takes a $75. That $600 goes to you according to your split, and you get the balance as like an extra part of your commission. So it's extra income to you, depending on what you want to charge. The one thing I would suggest and urge is to pick your number and stick to it. Charge everybody the same. If for some reason you charge the first 6 or 7 people $600, my connection is unstable. I don't know why that would be. It looks fine on my side. So if you charge the first 6 people $600 and they're all named John, and then the next 3 people you charge $400 and their name is Sally, you're going to run into a lawsuit. So I would say charge everybody the same thing and keep it straight across the board. And it's part of your business plan on what you want to charge. I think anything over 600 is getting extreme, but pick your number. I picked 475. It's just a number, or 495. That's just a number I just felt comfortable with and picked. So that's what you can pick. So Crystal, what is your exact question though? Is there an exact question you have about that fee that I haven't addressed?
When it got to line 2B,
Yes.
and going through 1A, 1B,
Yes.
and all of that with the percentage or the flat.
Yeah, and that's the confusing part of that piece of paper I was referring to. And that there's a couple of reasons why that's confusing. So basically what I do is on the first part, that's where you're representing the buyer.
Mhm.
So if you're showing homes that are consistently 2.5%, you're going to put 2.5% and there's a dollar sign and a blank. Always put 0, whichever's greater. I'm going to get paid 2.5%. Now, if I'm an agent that only works for 3%, then I'm going to put 3%.
Mhm.
If for some reason you want to charge the buyer over and above the commission you're receiving from the transaction, then you would put a higher number there, which I discourage. I don't do that.
Mhm.
I don't even know why they have the and or there. So if you're showing a property that is $40,000 and they're paying 3%, and you're saying to yourself, well, you know, and that's basically what you're showing. You're just showing shells for say $40,000, $50,000, and the commission's around $1,200, $1,500. But you've set a business plan that says, I'm not going to work for less than 3,000. That would be the only example where I would put 3% and or 3,000. So if you have a minimum commission that you're willing to work for, and the properties you're showing are below that minimum, that's when you would fill a number in there, which would be 3,000.
Okay.
As a new agent, it's hard to do that. But listen, when you set your business plan, you just got to stick to it.
Mhm.
You know, that's all there is to it. There are so many agents out there that if you try to get your buyer to pay you too much, you're going to lose business. That's my opinion. Others may differ, and that's fine. You know, I came up in a different market than what we're going with today. Today, I think it's really frustrating for buyers. I think if they like you as a person, they're probably going to work with you and try to do the best they can to stay with you. So the second part, okay, let's finish up that conveyancing part. That's where you're going to put that broker fee of whatever your number is, 400, 600, that's, so you're gonna go 2.5% and or 0, whichever's greater, and the and is the broker fee. So you have to decide, excuse me, what you're gonna work for there. Part 2 is really if you're showing a property that is not represented by an agent, it's a for sale by owner.
Mhm.
It's the same numbers. The tough thing about part 2 is when they printed these contracts or put them on templates, they forgot the dollar sign on the second part. So you have to actually text box that in, which is what you have to do there. The third part is really when you're doing a rental. That's about the lease transaction. So if you know this client's not going to ever turn into a renter, they're only going to be a buyer, you could either leave that blank or put not applicable. I wouldn't put 0 because someone could argue that case, but I would just probably leave it blank or put not applicable. So that part's a little confusing because I don't think it's really clear to most people on why is there part 1 and 2, like what's the difference? Again, part 2 is a for sale by owner. So does that clear up for you?
Yes.
Okay. So while we'll stay on this conveyancing fee, because this is something that came up again yesterday, when you do your estimate, your buyer's estimate of closing costs, there's also something in there called a broker fee or commission paid to the, paid by the buyer. I always just list that whole number under broker fee. Because the buyer, buyer paying a commission, they think that's kind of weird. And it gets a little more confusing because when you get into the affiliated business disclosure and you're checking whether you want our mortgage and title people to contact your client. So you check yes or no, and then below that it says you're going to pay Keller Williams X amount of dollars for conveyancing. So if you're using one of the conveyancers and there's say a $200 fee, that part of your 600 gets disclosed on that affiliate business disclosure for 200. So you're not going to collect both. And that's where it gets confusing. Just like when Kelly did her listing contract, or she's working with a potential seller. On the listing contract, when it breaks down a commission, you say, I'm charging 6%, I'm going to pay the buyer agent 3%, transaction agent 1%, the sub agent, I'm not going to pay at all. 9 times out of 10, the seller looks at that and goes, well, wait a minute, you told me 6%, you got this as 9 or 10, because they're adding up all those percentages. The 6% is the total commission. Down below, it's the breakdown on how it's going to be distributed. That's kind of similar to the buyer agreement where you're doing that 2.5%, 3%, whatever the case may be, and or 0, and then the broker fee. So does that clear it up for you, Crystal? Did that make it confusing for anybody? So have you all gone through the buyer agency agreement? Are you all looking at it now or no? Crystal's looking at it. You got a hard copy from paper? Okay.
Mike, are you able to share your screen?
I didn't do that yet because I got sidetracked with you guys doing that explanation. Do you need me to share the screen or you just want to go through it and I'll
it's
just answer questions?
It's helpful so
Yeah.
that the class can see what you're looking at and explaining.
Right,
Okay.
I agree.
Right. Are you all going to pull it up on your end too, or just look at mine?
You want to
I
look
think
at,
if we look at yours, we can follow along with where you are at each step.
Let's see here.
Yeah, I have it pulled up, but it's really hard to see because I have to do the split screen. So it might be easier if you do it and then it's just the one screen.
Okay.
But my face is so close to the screen.
at the bottom, you'll see share screen on the green box at the bottom.
I'm looking for actually one to show you and so forth without going into command.
Okay.
There's one here. I have one I think is executed, but that's okay. Let's go here. I had to find one from PA first.
Are they different when you get to the Delaware one? I'm applying
Yes.
for a Delaware license, so that's why I'm.
Yeah, Delaware is completely different. Delaware is crazy compared to PA.
Oh,
Maryland's even worse, but we won't get into that.
wonderful.
Okay, you got it, guys? Here we are. Can you see it? We're good? Okay. So again, I keep calling it a buyer agency contract because it's also the same contract you use for renters. That's why tenant is in parentheses. The buyer takes precedence over the tenant part. So again, you go down, you have Keller Williams, you should all have the company license number written down somewhere, whether it's in your phone or next to your computer, on your computer, company phone. You know, these are clients that bought out in Pennsylvania here, like the border of Bucks County and Montgomery County. So I've got my broker's number, my direct phone, which was a direct dial at Philly, which I don't use anymore. I always just put my cell phone in because I don't want them calling the office. So you can see we have room for their address. Here I didn't put their phone number in, it's already my phone, but I probably should put the phone number there, just good practice. And then I've got their email addresses. Now, the one thing I want to go back to, when I asked you if you watched Vicky's agreement of sale video, she makes a pretty good point that, and Emerald started doing this, and it's, I see it, so it works. Vicky recommends you do your contracts in all cap letters because it is easier to read. It really is. You're not being obnoxious. You know, when you text all caps, everybody thinks you're angry. On a contract, if you want to try it, it's a lot easier to read. It's funny, but you know, give it a try and see if you like it or not. Important that on all of your contracts, you put an end date, listing or buyer agreement. If you leave that blank, the contract assumes it's no more than 1 year because by law you can't go over a year. But if you leave that blank, lawyers could make arbitrary arguments if somebody wants to get out of a contract. So always put a contract, you can put up to 1 year, but no longer. On this one, I skipped the 0, I just put the 2.5%. You don't have to put the 0 because 2.5 is greater than a blank. But I just find now that I'm teaching it here, back then I wasn't, putting it just makes more sense, just so there's no contradiction. And on line B, you can see there is no $sign next to or when you go down to 1B. So what I had Emerald do is do a text box. When you go to your DocuSign, you can create a text box there and put $0. Not a big deal. And 475. Now there are some agents who will put the 475.00. If you want to make that clearer, you can. I think it's pretty clear that it's 475, but if you want to actually add the zeros, you can. And in the event of a lease transaction, this doesn't apply. I just left it blank. So you, like I said, you can put blank or non-applicable, whichever you're more comfortable with. And this is what I started doing, which I haven't mentioned before until I just saw it. So it's good you had me pull this up. In talking to agents, if you're going to put down 2.5%, because generally speaking, that's what's being offered. We did come across one case where the agent put 2.5%. It was a $700,000 property paying 3%. The buyer went back to the contract and said, well, listen, you only are collecting 2.5%, and I see the listings paying 3%, so you have to give me that half point. You know, technically that buyer is wrong because all these contracts are really with Keller Williams, the brokerage. You are just the designated agent. So in reality, if that were to happen, that would mean that Keller Williams would pay you 2.5% and they could keep the difference, but really wouldn't go to the buyer. Just to avoid arguments and lawyers, the agent and the company gave the half point to the buyer towards closing costs. So I did start writing in on some, if I get that sense they're going to be difficult, I did start writing this in on other 2.5% or greater, depending on what rate's being offered by the listing company or by Bright MLS, if you want to write Bright MLS even. So if you wanted to put 2.5% and cover yourself on a higher rate, you could copy this sentence and put it in every time. If you're going to put 3%, you don't need this sentence because nobody's paying more than 3% as a general rule. One of the big things we're running into now is, and it's a big Keller Williams thing, not just, more so than other companies. Listing agents are charging 6%, keeping 3.5%, and still paying out 2.5%. In the old days, used to assume, and you know what happens when you assume, right? If it was paying out 2.5%, they were keeping 2.5%. Whatever the listing agent gets paid is not, it's not up to us. It's a contract between them and the seller. So if they can do that, that's part of their business plan, that's fine. As a listing agent, that's your right. So if you want to collect 6 and only pay 2.5, you certainly can. You're going to make more money. And it seems like more and more listing agents are doing that, so why not? It should be the other way around because the buyer agent's doing more work, but that's okay. So decide that as part of your listing program, what you want to do. On the buy side, if you're going to put 3%, you're fine. Just remember, if you put 3% and only collect 2.5%, it opens that door for other arguments too. So you can read all the contract. The dual agency is not really recommended. The only time I do dual agency is if I have a deal where buyer and seller, it's a $200,000 property. Buyer calls me off the sign, looks at the property, says, look, I'll give you 200,000 cash. I'm waiving everything and I can settle in 2 weeks. Now you're not negotiating anything. So to be a dual agent is it's not really that risky in that case. As a dual agent, if you represent two parties and there's negotiations that take place, it's like a ping pong match for you. You can't advise either party. You can only represent one person at a time. If you're going to try to be a dual agent, then, you know, Marquis says to me, okay, tell Crystal, the seller, I'll give her X. But I want to do, what do you think, Michael? If that's what you want to do, that's what you should do. Well, what price should I offer? I can't advise you. Not without Crystal's permission. So it gets kind of weird. Now, sometimes you'll have a person who's on the list side that'll say to you, I don't care. You can tell her all you want because I already know what I'm going to do. So if you get the permission from the person to advise the other, just make sure you have that in writing. You know, as per our conversation, you've given me permission to advise the buyer in a dual agency situation. Please respond. That way you cover yourself. Dual agency is not really recommended at any level, let alone new agents, because if you make a mistake, you've opened the door for a lot of people to get sued. In this particular scenario, if an agent on the coaching program does make a mistake that takes us to court, it would wind up where Vicky, Sean, Dana, me, Chris, and you, whoever you would be, would all go to Harrisburg together. Because we're part of a team. That's that whole team concept. If I'm Michael Brooks' team and you're all my agents, and someone on the team makes a mistake that I just didn't, you know, I never even saw a piece of paper, I go to court because you're part of my team and I'm responsible for you, which is why it's so important that we review your documents before you send them to the agent or your clients. We want to avoid those mistakes whenever possible. Mistakes are going to happen as part of the business. Don't. The first contract you write might be a nightmare. You might miss half of it. That's okay. That's why you're trying to learn. You know, when you go through school, they don't teach you any of this. Real estate school doesn't teach you any of the contract stuff, really. They go over to buyer agency and agreement sale. They don't really dive into it. Services to others, pretty self-explanatory. When they have a buyer contract, they shouldn't have more than one. Whenever they have a contract, it's with you, just like a listing contract. So just make sure if they are working with other, if you meet someone, they say, yeah, I'm working with Joe Smith. I don't really like him. I want a new agent. Well, did you sign a buyer agency contract? And if they say, no, I haven't signed anything, you got to take their word for it. Sometimes they just forget they signed it. But if they verbally or an email fire Joe, that's fine. Buyer contracts are less combative than a listing contract would be. Confidentiality, anything you learn during this transaction, it stays with you till you go to your grave. You're not supposed to share that information with anybody else. If you do, you could wind up in court, which none of us want to do. One of the biggest reasons why you could get fired on a buyer agency contract is if they don't feel that you know the area. So one of the things I started or stopped doing, how you want to look at it, is I don't put my office address on my card. I just put Keller Williams Realty. I don't even put Philadelphia. Because if I'm working with an agent from Bucks County or Montgomery County or Delaware County, and I say, well, what do you know? You're from Philadelphia. So I don't put the address. It's not required by the state that you put the address. The requirement is the company's name, phone number, and broker ID if you're going to do contracts. So that's something you might want to think about. Deposit money comes in play where the listing company generally holds the deposit money for the most part. EXP, some Remaxes, some companies will tell you on their MLS sheet that you're responsible for holding escrow. So the broker deposit money notice means that the buyer is entitled to know where their money is being held at all times. Generally speaking, it would be at Long and Foster or Caldwell Bank or Berkshire Hathaway, and the office name. They don't necessarily get access to the exact bank or the escrow account, of course, but they need to know who has their money, who's responsible for that money. That's why the deposit money notice is important. Now, for me, I don't see any sense in sending a deposit money notice to the listing agent when you're doing an offer. That's a buyer agency document. Same way with the buyer agency contract. That never should go to the listing agent when you make an offer. And we'll go through those things a little bit later as well. Yeah, the Civil Rights Act is going to be part of every contract. We know this because we're getting beaten to death with it. You all would have taken the class as part of your training, part of your education, getting your license. I have to take the class next week, I believe. Inspections have been a sticking point with offers. I mean, it's hard out there, and waiving inspections is pretty difficult. If your buyer is not comfortable waiving inspections, then you just can't do it. In a lot of cases, that means you're probably not going to get your offer accepted, but you have to see if you're in competition or not. So if you're doing an offer, I always find out from the agent, hey, I'm interested in the property. I'm planning on submitting something today or tomorrow. Do you have any offers in hand? The wording of in hand is very important because they might say they've had verbal conversations. Hey, I talked to Crystal yesterday. I'm expecting an offer from her today or tomorrow. So it's not in hand. No, I don't have anything in hand. So Crystal may never write that offer because her buyer might have changed her mind. So if you know they've got an offer or two in hand or three in hand, questions now are, do you want to get into a bidding war, which, you know, up until now, you pretty much didn't have a choice. And what do you want to do to make your offer stand out? Do you want to go higher in price, higher in deposits? Do you want to only, you know, elect one inspection instead of all inspections? So this is all going to be between you and your buyer. And you can never recommend they waive inspections because, again, you're going to wind up where you don't want to wind up. In the old days, you generally would do home, wood, radon. I mean, I've never done a lead-based paint inspection in my life. There's too many levels and it's too much of a cost for most people to do them. And most people are going to scrape loose paint and repaint anyway. You know, if you have septic or well, you're going to do those inspections, that kind of thing. So a lot of this is boilerplate stuff that really isn't going to change your approach, recording of the property. You don't really care how that gets done. You just know it does. The one thing I do joke about with clients, you know, just to kind of show some personality and lighten things up, is always kid them about, you know, we're the only business I know that tells you on every document how to sue us. This does it, the agreement of sale does it, the listing contract does it. Recovery fund, hey, agent screws up, just call us. We'll sue them for you. It's like, and I usually laugh. And they really get it. The other reason why I do that is when I explain how this works, it kind of puts them in like, well, gee, I don't ever want to have to do that, because the way the fund works is Joe Smith makes a mistake, he could be sued for up to $20,000. If Joe Smith is on a team, him and the team lead can be sued now for up to $40,000. So what I tell them is, you know, if Joe Smith makes a mistake and gets sued for 20 grand, he loses his license, he's suspended until he can pay back 22,000 to the fund. So he can't work, but he's got to pay them back 22,000 before he can practice real estate again. So when a buyer or a seller, or anyone in this non-real estate, you know, contract hears that, they would think twice maybe about trying to sue you, knowing that it's going to cost you your job. So I kind of just throw that out there as just kind of like a fun little thing. I don't really dwell on or anything like that. I just kind of mention it and just go from there. Are there any, what are the specific questions you have on the contract as we're looking at it? Anybody? This is all pretty clear. Again, it looks pretty harmless, doesn't it? It's a couple pages, not a whole lot to do. But when you get thrown into the fire and all of a sudden you're writing, you know, especially an offer, these blanks somehow disappear. You don't see them. And then we look at when we look at it, we go, well, you missed that entire section 2. You go, what? It happens. Don't worry about it. It's all part of it. Again, me going through this with you, I see some things I've done different that I forgot about, like, section 2.5, when I was showing these guys properties that were all over the place on commission. I could have just put 3%, but I didn't want to lock them in and make them pay a difference because I knew their financial situation. So I kind of found a happy medium by doing both sentences. So if are we all clear now? We're all good on the buyer agency contract? Is that good?
Yes,
Okay, so go ahead, somebody.
I was just
Okay.
answering you, yes.
Okay, so I'm going to stop the share and we'll go into this. So we're all comfortable with the buyer agency contract. We're all pretty comfortable with the buyer consultation. Anyone want any pointers on that part? We're good there. I see Kelly blinking. She's thinking. At first, I thought you froze. You were perfectly still for like 3 seconds. I'm like, did Kelly freeze? Okay. So when we talk about open, from contract to close, all right, now we've got the buyer agreement done. We're all working with a buyer. We're showing them a few properties. Now it's the fun time. Now it's time to write that first offer, which is pretty intense when you've never done it before. So how comfortable, I mean, I know that Emerald's done a few, and Kelly's working with a seller. How comfortable is everybody with the whole command, DocuSign, back and forth platform? Everybody good with that? So it's funny to me, I have a different perspective on that than what the new agents have. It could be just a perception thing where I consider command and DocuSign to be like brother and sister or interwoven. You can't do one without the other. A lot of the new agents are approaching it as they are two separate things, and they're really not. They're two separate screens, but you go through command and go through DocuSign and drag documents back and forth. So as long as we're all comfortable with that whole concept, that works out pretty good. We're good with the buyer consultation. Has anyone gone through, I know Emerald has, have the others gone through the agreement of sale and practice trying to fill them out? Yes, okay. Is there a particular section of the agreement of sale that is confusing, or do you want to do the same thing where I pull one up, we kind of just go through it? Is that what you want to do again? The share screen? I see one shake. Thumbs up if you want to see a shared screen agreement of sale. I see one person, 2 people. Everyone else is just kind of like, I don't really care. Marky, the other 2 are just smiling, going, I don't know. All part of the fun. So I'll probably just go into those same folks again, pull theirs up. I probably have a blank one in here.
Mike, something that was good for me when I was learning is knowing, okay, so you have a client and their client likes their house and they want to put an offer in. As a new agent, I was stumped because I'm like, okay, they want to put an offer in, I'm excited, but I don't know what forms I need to now put in for an offer. So of course, you need the agreement of sale, the buyer's estimated closing costs, the buyer agency contract, and then there's some other forms as well. I think that that's helpful to know. So if your buyer,
so when you go into the platform of command and you go into create that opportunity, which you've already created the contact, obviously, because you have the buyer. And you create that opportunity, it's going to start with level 1 is active, and it's going to ask for the consumer notice and the affiliated business disclosure. You're going to do those 2 documents. So when you go into that next step and it says under contract, it's going to, the list of what you need is going to populate. And then you just have to go fill those forms and drag them in, but we can go through that whole concept as well. So if you want to start there, we can. So basically, when you're dealing with a buyer, you're going to have the buyer agency contract, consumer notice, affiliated business disclosure, or the first 3 things you're going to have done, correct? So now you're showing a property to me and I say, listen, I love it. Let's write the offer. Let's say it's $300,000, doesn't matter how much it is. So now you're panicking because you haven't done it before and you're going, oh, geez, what the heck do I even need? And that's kind of what you're saying, right, Emerald? Like, where do I even start? Okay. So where you're going to start is going back into your contact, creating the opportunity, going through stage 1. When you go to the contract stage 2, it's going to say that you need the agreement of sale. It's going to say that you need the deposit money notice. You're going to have to get the disclosures come from the list side. So you're going to need a basic disclosure, which is a seller's disclosure. You're going to need a lead-based paint disclosure if it was built, prior to 1978. You're going to need those. Technically, you're supposed to have I get to go in a second, Kelly. You're supposed to have a buyer estimate of closing costs signed either before or simultaneously with the offer. You should never do the buyer estimate of closing costs later, because the buyer can come back on you saying that they didn't understand the full cost of the property. So Kelly has a question.
I was just wondering if you could maybe go over, say you're working with a first-time buyer and they have no idea how to make an offer on a house other than price. Just sort of being able to talk through different points of negotiation with them, like what other than price they can negotiate on to be competitive if they're sort of relying on you to be the one to win them the house when they don't know what to offer.
All right, that's a good question, because that gets tricky on what you advise or don't advise. So because we're in such a highly competitive market and people are just making these crazy offers, again, you really have to put it in terms that are, I'm trying to think of safe. So you can say, hey, Michael, I see, we wanted an offer. We have some documents we have to fill out and some decisions we have to make. Basically, the listing agent is going to look at price, terms, and conditions. So here's what we're going to offer. Here's what the market shows me. Here's what I recommend we go in at price. And you're going to be able to recommend a price because that's why you're there. The comps show me this. The word on the street tells me this. And this $300,000 house is probably going to sell for $330,000. Let's just say that's the answer. And they say, well, how else can I strengthen my offer? You could offer a bigger deposit than the $1,000 good faith. You could go in with a $5,000 good faith. The first deposit is meaningless as far as the risk that your client is taking. Because if they accept the offer and I give a $20,000 first deposit and the offer is accepted because, wow, this guy's giving us 20 grand up front. It really does. It does make an impact, but from your perspective as a buyer agent, you're not putting your client at any more risk than if you put $1,000 down. Because anytime from the time that agreement of sale is accepted and executed till the time you get through inspections, your buyer can walk out and get their $20,000 back. So do you see where it really is half a dozen one the other? But if I said to you, you have two offers, one with $1,000 good faith and one with 20,000, and you're the listing agent, which one's going to open up your eyes? The bigger deposit. Now, I'm not necessarily suggesting that big a number, but the norm used to be 1,000, 1,500 on like a $300,000 property, and your next deposit, whatever you did, your next deposit would come out to like say 9,000 total. Somewhere around 3 to 5% is what the general rule of thumb used to be. So those two areas you can safely advise people on how to make their offer stronger. Obviously, if they don't need a seller's assist, don't do it because it weakens your offer and they're only financing their closing costs. So if you can get to $330,000, $10,000 good faith deposit, there's always a second deposit when I do an offer. And that second deposit is going to equal, like I said, between 3 and 5% down, depending on what type of loan they're taking. FHA can't go 5% because they can only come up with 3.5. So let's say you're doing a 20% down conventional loan, they're going to come up with 60 grand anyway between now and the table. So I might give them, $5,000 on the first deposit and maybe another 5 or 10 on the second deposit. Just try to keep it in that like 3 to 5% range, and that'll strengthen it that way. Again, no seller's assist. So as you move down the contract, the sticking point comes into the inspection section. There are agents who, one way to try to get around that inspection section is by electing only, say, wood destroying insects. Yes, Butler. Emerald, rather. I keep calling you Butler. Yes, Emerald.
Can
Any
you share your
questions?
screen? Can you share your screen, please?
You want me to share the screen? We're just talking as we go through the,
Agreement of sale.
okay, we could do that.
It's just
Go to
easier for us to follow along with you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just kind of chatting about the in general, so that's okay. We can throw it up there and. Okay, there you go. You like that share screen feature, don't you?
Yes, like the Blackboard.
There's a couple big smiles there. Yeah, I love that share screen. Well, I'm glad you're asking, because for me, like what we're doing right now, we're not really going through the agreement of sale. We're just kind of answering a general question. But I'll keep the share screen up there. So we'll skip this. Like, if we want, we can go real quick and then get to that point. So we have all the buyer seller information. I recommend you put the addresses in. That's why the blanks are there. Don't just put John Smith buyer. His address is going to be on this buyer financial anyway. It's going to be on his pre-approval letter anyway. The only thing I don't ever put on listing information on Bright or any document at the other agencies would be my buyer's personal information, which would be phone number and email. You never ever want the other agent to have that stuff. But the address is public record. So just, that's why the lines are there. So fill it all out. Keep yourself honest that way. On the seller's address, it may not be the same address as the property you're selling. They may be an investor, so you may have to go to tax records and find out where they really live. Because that's what that's asking there, is the seller's address, not the property you're buying. The next section is asking what property you're buying. So you're going to put a complete address in there: 123 Main Street, Philadelphia, PA, 19134. Philadelphia, Philadelphia, Philadelphia would be the municipality, school district, county. The tax ID is on Bright MLS on the listing or in tax records, whatever you're more comfortable with. I jump into tax ID because I want to put the ID number too. I usually pick like the lot or block number. That's a secondary identification part of the property. So I always fill that identification line in as well. Then again, you're going to come down and fill in all the broker information for you, the buyer agent. Then you're going to fill in again as much as you know for the listing agents. A lot of times the company license number for the listing side is not available on Bright, but I text the agent, say, I'm about to write an offer. Can you send me your company license number for the agreement of sale? 9 times out of 10, they're going to send it to you. You are always either going to be a buyer agent or a seller agent. The company is always going to be the same thing, unless you're selling a property that's also listed by KW Philadelphia. So if one of you are writing an offer on someone else's property in the office, the company is a dual agent. You are not. We are never, ever a seller agent or buyer agent. That's called sub-agency. We don't practice that. Not a huge mistake, but if you make it, it'll get caught. You're going to date the agreement of sale. Purchase price gets written like a check. So the first part, you're going to write the number. You're going to type in the numbers. The second part, you're going to type it like a check. Write it all out. $300,000. Always leave the deposit 5 days. Now, another way to answer Kelly's question on how you can strengthen an offer, you could make the deposit due within 2 days, as long as you can physically do it. Get that deposit to them faster. You know, in addition to possibly putting up a higher deposit. That's another way to kind of make yourself stand out. For the additional deposit, I always jump to line 3 or line 10, section 3, and I always put within 48 hours of the resolution of all inspections, if you're having inspections. If you're not having inspections, don't worry about it. So I'm like, okay, I'm okay. So if you're doing inspections, I always use that line for within 48 hours of the resolution of all inspections. The reason why I do that is your inspections could get extended. So if you happen to put, if the inspection time is 10, 5, and 7, which is 17 days, and you put 19 days as when you're going to give that second check, but you run into an issue that needs to be further investigated, and you're going to run into 21, 22, 23 days, you've given both deposits before you've actually resolved the inspections. So that's why I put within 48 hours of the resolution of inspections. Any questions? No? Okay, good. Seller's assist, if you can avoid it, I would. don't forget the settlement date. That's important. I've seen a couple come through from others with no settlement date. You got to have one. If it's a conventional loan, you can usually do it within 30 days. FHA is running 45. If you're going through, same with VA, if you happen to be going through one of the housing loan programs in Philadelphia, they're really behind. I mean, that could take you 60 to 75 days. So just, depending on what type of loan you're going with, make sure you give yourself enough time, because the agreement of sale says settlement date is December 22nd, 2021, or before, if buyer and seller agree. It's easier to move that settlement up than push it back. Now, if you're in a competitive bid situation, you want to close, and they want to close as soon as possible, you still want to be cognizant of how much time it takes for a loan to clear. You can't put 2 weeks if it's a loan. Cash you can, but not if you're financing. Not unless the lender says, yeah, this is our 4th deal we're working on. I've got everything I need. I can close in 2 weeks. Now, hopefully you know that because they've only been working with you. So here's where you really need to get the lender involved when you really want to get pressed on the settlement date. You're allowed to and should call the lender. Introduce yourself to the lender. Hey, I'm Michael Brooks. I'm working with Emerald Butler Smith. She's buying this property here. I've got your pre-approval letter. Just want to see how quickly can we close. We're working with Crystal Torres. She wants to close in 2 weeks. She told me you've got everything she needs. Can we do that? The lender says yes. Go ahead and do it. The lender says, I probably need 3 weeks. Listen to the lender, because if you don't hit your settlement date, you put your buyer at risk of losing their deposit. So you don't want to do that. Time is of the essence. This is all boilerplate to protect your client. Time is of the essence. 5A, I had this conversation yesterday. 9 times out of 10, that date gets missed. I try to force it my hand within 24 hours for a response unless it's otherwise specified in Bright. If Bright says, please allow 48 hours for a response, do that, because you don't want to do something that goes against what the listing's already asking for and put yourself in a bad light. If I write an offer today and I submitted, if I submitted an offer by now today, I'm putting tomorrow as the response date. Now, if they miss it, the only thing that does, it makes the contract voidable. It doesn't void the contract. It just means I'm out of time here. You're still negotiating. So when you make your changes on the agreement of sale, because maybe you're negotiating price, and now, tomorrow's gone, we're into the 9th. When you do your changes on the agreement, you guys just have to remember to update that one line to say 12/10 instead of 12/8. But that date gets missed a lot, but don't panic. As long as you're still negotiating in good faith, that's not going to kill the deal. You try to avoid that, but it's just another change you have to make, that's all. On the zoning part, I always fill the zoning in, even though it says for a single family, it's not required. So I always go to the tax record, it'll say R1 or R5 or R10, or if it's commercial, it'll say C whatever. I always put that in just as another form of backup on identifying the property and another level of protection. Some agents will just write the word residential, some leave a blank. Again, our lawyer doesn't want blanks. So try not to do that. Inclusions and exclusions are generally found on Bright MLS. If it's blank and they don't have inclusion or exclusions written, and you went through the property and there's a washer, dryer, and refrigerator, ask for them. They didn't exclude them. They didn't include them. They kind of left it open. If they say negotiable, ask for them. If they exclude them, you can have a conversation with the agent, but don't put it as an inclusion when they've already excluded it, especially in a bid situation. You don't want to be that rubbing the wrong way kind of thing. I always put in there washer, dryer, refrigerator. Now, let's say the house has 3 refrigerators, 2 refrigerators, and you don't want the one in the garage or the basement. Then I would put washer, dryer, kitchen, refrigerator. If there's one in the basement and the garage, you want one of those, but not both. Basement refrigerator or kitchen refrigerator, identify them. If you want to exclude the basement refrigerator, you don't want to deal with it, put it in there as an exclusion so that the other agent knows you don't want it. Then I always put as is, no monetary value. Not to say that those brand new appliances are worthless, But the lender likes to see that phrase, no monetary value. You can't put really anything else here other than those items. You can't put pool table. You can't put stools. Any personal property cannot go here. If there's personal property that that you've already decided is going to be part of the deal, there's a separate addendum you can put that doesn't go to the lender. It says pool table, stools, whatever personal property may be. That doesn't go to the lender. The other thing that never goes to the lender is the inspection report. That never goes to the lender because they don't want to know about the house. They don't want to know about repairs. The mortgage part, you have to make sure you check off either waive or elected. How much are you going to finance? Now, the big discussion here on FHA, when you do your estimate of closing costs, you're going to see a couple different numbers. You're going to see loan amounts. Then you're going to see total amount financed. For loan amount, even though that wording is the same, I'm still putting in total amount financed. I'm going to protect my buyer. So if it's a 205 loan amount, on FHA, that's not true because the MIP gets wrapped into the loan. So the loan might be 210, 211. So that's the number I'm using. Some agents disagree with that, but it's not a sticking point that's going to kill the deal. I just protect my buyer by putting that number in there. Make sure you're filling all the blanks. It's usually 30 years on those loans, could be 15 on conventional. Fill in a type of loan, FHA, VA, conventional. The loan to value ratio is, if you're doing FHA and they're putting down 3.5%, this is 96.5. If you're putting down 10%, that's 90, 20% be 80. So you have to put in that percentage. Lender, they like to see the lender's name there. If you're trying to decide between a few lenders, it doesn't really matter. You can change lenders during a transaction. If you put a lender's name in there and try and change lenders, it should be approved by the seller. So if you put in there Keller Williams Mortgage Company, which one day will exist, then you change to Rocket Mortgage, that might cause an issue for the seller because they may not like the online lender. If you put to be determined, because you work with multiple lenders, some agents are okay with that. Others want you to put an actual lender in there. Whatever name is on the pre-approval letter is usually what I put in there. That's all. Interest rate, you usually want to go with a range. So if they're already approved for, say, 3.25%, I would put like 3 to 3.5. If you only put like 3.25%, your offer may not get accepted because if the mortgage rate fluctuates over 3.25%, that's an out for your buyer. So the seller wants some spread there of comfort, knowing if the rates creep up a little bit, you're still in a deal. Talk to the lender. Make sure if they're approved at 3.25% and rates jump to 3.5%, they're still approved. So you want to ask the lender while you're talking to them, how quick can we close? What type of interest rate spread can I use on the agreement of sale? They'll know what you're asking because they go through this all the time. The only time you're doing the second mortgage is if they're actually taking out 2 separate loans. Maybe for some reason they have to break it apart to avoid jumbo. You're probably not going to run into that too much because they just raised the jumbo to like 647, which is pretty high. When you get down to line 114, that's your mortgage commitment date, which is normally going to be about 2 weeks prior to closing. So if your closing is 45 days out, you're going to probably put like 30 days away from the agreement of sale for your mortgage commitment date. That gives the lender time to process all the documents, get the appraisal done and so forth. Once that mortgage commitment comes in, you send it to the listing agent. It says, hey, we're good to go here. We're subject to these conditions. There'll be conditions on the mortgage commitment, which would be proof of title, homeowner's insurance, subject to appraisal, subject to the credit conditions not changing on the buyer. There should only be maybe like between 3 and 5 stipulations, they call them, or conditions. If you put too short a date there, the lender still has to produce that commitment, but he's going to have like 20 things like verify this check, verify this letter, and that just makes the listing agent nervous. So try to go, no closer than 2 weeks prior to the settlement date if you can. to give you everybody time to get their documents in. Again, this is all loan to value, explains how that works. If the buyer furnishes false information and goes into default, they're going to lose their deposit. So it's important that your buyer understands that all their communication has to be above board. You know, if for some reason you're getting a feeling that your buyer is kind of starting to play games with you, which we did have with an agent recently, it got kind of ugly and messy. So it can happen. Just go with your gut feeling. And if you're feeling concerns about some things going on, pick up the phone, call me, call Dana, call Vicky, and just kind of talk it through so you don't say or do anything and get yourself in trouble. The FHA VA section is another way of protecting that type of a buyer. The appraisal is built into this section. It's right there. For some reason, every lender at some point is going to ask you for a separate FHA VA addendum. It's the same thing as what's in the agreement of sale, word for word. They somehow always want it on a separate piece of paper. I don't provide that to them until they ask for it. Some have started realizing they don't need it because it's in the agreement of sale. Here you're going to put the purchase price as opposed to before when I talked about the mortgage. So if they're buying the house for $300,000, that's what goes there. Has nothing to do with the mortgage itself. That's what it has to appraise for. The other thing to keep in mind is when you do a seller's assist. So let's say I'm doing an offer of 300, but I want a 6% assist. And they say, well, no, you know, I can't do both. And I raise the price to 318 and ask for a 6% assist, which is the same as a $300,000 straight offer. The 318 goes here. That's the purchase price. It has to appraise for the 318. So that's why a lot of agents get nervous about an assist because it could inflate the price and cause an appraisal issue. So if you have any questions or concerns as you're negotiating on that, just let one of us know. We'll tell you the best way to handle that. Always check off water and sewer. A lot of times I see that get missed because it's kind of like the sewer, especially the sewer part. Most agents are checking the public water. A lot are missing to check public sewer. If you run into something with a on-lot sewage system, you've got all these different provisions here that can take place on the inspection process. So you want to make sure you check the proper box. Are you dealing with a holding tank? Are you dealing with something in proximity to the well? And if you don't know, you have to ask. You're going to have to ask the home inspector. If you can talk to one ahead of time because you haven't hired one yet because you're just doing the agreement of sale. Talk to the listing agent and say, hey, I see you've got an on-lot sewage system. Is it within proximity to the well? Does it have a holding tank? A lot of times the disclosure will tell you these things, and they should because their questions are on there, but disclosures aren't filled in accurately sometimes. You can only answer this to the best of the knowledge that you're being presented with. Don't leave it blank is all I'm saying. If you mark the wrong thing, we can get around that. There's all types of inspection clauses to kick in if you're doing an online sewer system that fails. So we don't want to get sidetracked by that. We'll deal with that if and when it happens. Most of the properties do not have any of these other conditions for land use. Unless you get out into like Western PA or maybe some of the southern Bucks County farmlands. Most of these, if you're dealing with Philadelphia, you're not going to have anything under section D, line 242 to 249. You're just not going to have them. Again, if they exist, it should be in the disclosure. And anytime you see something on a disclosure that looks a little bit unusual, you should question it. Call a listing agent. Hey, I see on the disclosure you've got this. Like in Philly, you have the tax abatement, which is transferable, the 10-year tax abatement on new construction. If they're selling it before 10 years, that abatement gets transferred to the new buyer. That's not in here, but that's something that will come up during the transaction, I would think. And then it goes on to explain what each one is: Open Space Act, conservation easements, real estate disclosure law. Anything that we've gone through so far that you have a question about, or should we just keep going? We all good? Looks like we're all good. Oops, I keep hitting that wrong button. Come on, scroll down. Okay. So we're going to talk about waiving contingencies and buyers' due diligence. So the buyer has the right to do any and all inspections they want to do during the inspection time frame. If you actually read the inspection paragraph, it covers a lot of different things. So there's really not a need sometimes for some of these separate addendums that they have out there. So, you know, on the home inspection, I mean, it says structural components, roof, windows, doors, building materials on the exterior, the fascia, the gutters, the downspouts. Swimming pools, hot tubs, and spas, just so you know, are not part of a typical home inspector's wheelhouse. They usually involve separate inspectors. So a normal home inspection would not include those, but it's saying you are entitled to do those inspections. So in other words, you don't have to do a separate addendum that says we're going to inspect the pool. It's already in there. I just want you to know that's usually a separate inspector. So you have the home inspector plus a pool company. So that's another cost to the buyer that they have to realize. Anytime there's a pool involved, you should inspect it. At least a visual inspection of the plaster or the construction of the liner, that kind of thing. I mean, so it goes on to talk about storage tanks and so forth. Again, storage tanks are a separate inspector. Indoor air quality can usually be done by a home inspector, but it's a separate inspection cost. So a lot of times, you know, it's good that the buyer knows what these costs are because that's going to add up. Indoor air quality, other than radon, because that would be covered under radon, indoor air quality would be basically another way for saying mold test, really what it is. The mold test itself is not terribly expensive. It's if they find mold, it gets pretty expensive to correct. And then it says any other items buyer may select. That's a pretty wide window, isn't it? So you don't need a separate addendum when this pretty much covers anything you could think of in a house. If you feel the need to do a separate inspection contingency, you can go down to other and type it in. In this market, the fewer inspections that you're putting up front, the better. So I started to say that there are agents that will do, say, wood infestation only. That's the only one they elect. But the home inspector is going to come in and do a full-blown home inspection. They're just not making it a contingency on the property. But what you have to be aware of as a listing agent is if they elect wood infestation as an inspection, they can still get out even if there aren't termites. Because under the inspection clause, it says you can walk for no reason. So it's a tricky way to kind of get around the inspection things that some agents are trying to do. Deed restrictions and zoning, I generally don't elect that because it's, especially, I mean, Philadelphia, you're dealing with basically a lot of town or row homes or condos. So you're really not going to run into deed restrictions or zoning issues unless the builder put the building itself in the wrong place, which shouldn't happen because the town, you know, township or a city or county are supposed to monitor that. So I usually waive that one. Water service would be in public water. I generally waive that unless the buyer's freaked out about, you know, potential lead in their water because they heard 10 years ago in this neighborhood they had a problem. You certainly could elect it. But again, the way the home inspection clause is worded, you could do a water test under the home inspection clause. Because the more inspections you elect, the more red flags go up for the listing agent or the seller. On-lot sewage, it says if applicable. So again, in Philly, you're generally not dealing with septic systems. So in this case, that could be left blank because it says if applicable. So you don't have to elect or waive that. It doesn't apply. Flood insurance, I always elect. You want to make sure the property can get homeowners insurance. That's something that a seller generally doesn't have any problem with that one. And they shouldn't, there's really no issue. They should have disclosed that they require flood insurance anyway. But making sure you can get property insurance is important because without property insurance, you can't get the mortgage. Property boundaries, unless there's something that looks suspicious, you think that maybe that fence or that shed or something's built on the property you're looking at, it just looks weird. Again, you could elect that, but in reality, it's still covered under home inspection because it says any inspection that the buyer wants to do. Lead-based paint, I've never elected one. Again, generally speaking, for FHA and VA, you can't have peeling paint visible on a property. So on that appraisal, if there's any peeling paint, that'll get marked as a required repair prior to closing. Your buyer cannot pay for that because it has to be done prior to closing. So you don't want your buyer paying for a repair to a house before it closes, because what if the deal falls apart? Then they lose that money potentially. So that's something I've never done one of those inspections. Again, you have to listen to your client. If there's something that's not listed here that you want to bring to the listing agent's attention, you want to make clear it's an issue, that's where you would do other. I don't believe I've ever used that line before. Well, again, only because of the way the home inspection's worded. If you go back to the home inspection itself, which I'll do, and you look at that last, there you go. And you look at this one section here where it says, after it has parentheses, fungi, indoor air quality, asbestos, underground storage tanks, and any other items buyer may select. That's wide open sentence there. The way I read that is anything and everything I want to inspect, I can, under property inspection, environment and hazards. I don't really need to elect. I'm still going to do wood infestation as a separate, because FHA and VA are going to require that. So I'm still going to list that as a separate. Radon, technically, do you have to elect that separately? No, because it's really still covered under the home inspection. It says indoor air quality, which is what radon is. So if there's ways you're trying to make your offer appear stronger, I think Kelly had asked that question earlier. Waiving radon is one way. It doesn't mean you're not going to do it. When you could waive all the inspections on your deal if your buyer is comfortable doing that. But as a buyer, you still have the right to inspect the property prior to closing. They have to allow you to inspect the property. They could say to you, hey, go ahead, knock yourself out. We're not doing repairs. We've made it clear you're buying it as is. It's for informational purposes only. The buyer may just want to know, what are they really looking at? Get some ideas of costs and so forth that they're going to do. The buyer can't get out of the deal under the inspection clause. But what they could do is, let's say they put $1,000 down in good faith. You've waived the inspections, but you want to do your second deposit in 2 weeks, because in that interim, you want to do an inspection. And if you find things that you're not happy with, you walk away from the $1,000. Now, me as a listing agent, if you're waiving all of your inspections, I know better. I want one deposit. Some listing agents may not know better. So there's a lot of ways you can try and strengthen it up. Inspection clauses is one way that a lot of agents are trying to use to strengthen their offers. Any questions on the inspection section? Nope. Okay. Any questions at all? Cool. Notices, again, this is all protection. It tells you, it explains what these different inspections are. There are some agents that will put the days in here, even though it says if not specified. There are agents who will still put the 10, the 5, and the 2, just not to leave blanks. You don't have to. It says if not specified, we know it's 10. If you're more comfortable filling those things in, go ahead and do it. That's certainly up to you. Okay. Let's get rid of that chat box. I mean, the agreement of sale is pretty intense. It's pretty involved. So if you haven't actually, gone and try to do it completely on your own, you'll see how much is involved. And it's funny how when it becomes like a real, I'm writing a real offer, how much different this looks, because now it's like go time. Title surveys, that's all done at the buyer's cost. Title insurance is required when you're taking financing out. Lender requires title insurance. Cash purchase is not required, but strongly suggested you get it. If you have any issues or questions with a client as you go through on this, that you're having trouble getting them to understand some things here, I would have the title company speak with them, because they can explain it better than I can. That's what their specialty is. Just like if there's ever any questions or concerns involved in the financing, you should have the lender. You should speak to the lender and/or have your client speak to the lender to get anything clarified that way. Because even though Sean and Dane and I have a lot of experience, we're not lenders and we're not title people. So go to the source whenever you can. Call notice around here, you don't have it. It's not really an issue. This agreement of sales for all of Pennsylvania, so you start getting at like Pittsburgh and so forth, you're going to have call notice. It's all boilerplate stuff here. I'm kind of go through it real quick. Make sure if you're dealing with a condo, if it's a 3407 or 5407, you check the proper box because they both mean something differently. 3407 is generally from the walls in. 5407 could be the exterior and the entire property. Just depends on how the declarations are written. So you want to make sure you check the proper box. The listing agent is responsible to get these to you, to get to your client to review. Keep in mind on an HOA or a condo association, until your client has reviewed and accepted those documents, even if you've waived all of your inspections, you can still get out of the deal under this clause. In theory, could you waive that right? Yes. If it becomes a push and shove thing, you could. If there's some concerns about what might be in those docs, I wouldn't. A lot of agents in this market are providing those docs with the listing under the documents section. They think that covers them, but it doesn't, because until you see the updated financials, they haven't fully disclosed the HOA or condo documents. So this is a section that you could use to your advantage when you're dealing with these things, as far as trying to buy time to get out of a deal by waiving inspections. This all gets tricky, so I wouldn't suggest you just do it on your own. I would say to talk to either me or Sean or Dana and give us your thought pattern and what your buyer's thinking, so we can kind of formulate a plan that works for everybody without exposing you to any risk. And even though, as coaches, we're trying to, just like you as an agent, we're trying to keep our coaching to a certain time, 9 to 7, whatever the case may be. When something comes up, it's 8 or 9 o'clock at night. At least for my agents, I tell them, it starts getting 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night and you get something you feel is an emergency, just send me a text. Just put 911 or the word help. And obviously, if I'm available, I'm going to call you right away. Business happens at night, happens on weekends. It's, even though we're trying to set that expectation with you all, it's no different than you setting the expectation with your buyers and sellers. When you have something that comes up, we're certainly going to be available to answer questions. And if you're under Sean or Dana, and you're not one of my agents that I'm working with one-on-one, but you can't reach Sean or Dana, feel free to call me, because we're all trying to help each other out. Line 723, it's very important that you check this. Otherwise, you're leaving your buyer open to a bigger potential lawsuit if they somehow default. This just says that the seller can only keep their deposit money. If you don't check that, the seller could then sue them for other damages. So it's real important that you check that block off. Mediation is something we try to avoid. If your client does decide to get a lawyer involved during the process, which is certainly their right, this section 27 will be crossed out. Lawyers hate it, but don't, if they get a lawyer involved, let them mark up the contract however they want, because we're not lawyers. If the client asks you, should I get a lawyer? You're certainly entitled to, if you feel more comfortable. You cannot tell them not to get a lawyer. Next section just explains how the releases work, as far as no one being responsible for things after it closes, which is not true, because up to a year you could be held liable. Again, it talks about how you can sue us on a real estate recovery fund. All communications between your client are just between you and your client. You're not to share it with anyone else without their express permission. And sometimes clients will tell you some things that are pretty private and personal that you don't want to get out there. And if you get it out there, you leave yourself open for lawsuits. Section 32 is going to be any other addendums that you may attach to the agreement of sale. So if you have to do a home sale contingency, if you have to do an appraisal contingency, if it's a short sale, you're going to check the box and fill out the appropriate document to attach to the agreement of sale. There are 3 blanks left for other situations on things that you might be attaching. For us, we don't usually use that a whole lot. Additional terms might be, let's say it's a brand new listing and they haven't had time to put the disclosure online yet. You're writing the offer like now. An additional term might be condition upon acceptance of property disclosures, because you haven't seen them yet. Technically, you're not supposed to write an offer without the disclosures. So if you don't have them, but you want to get the offer in, which is what I would do, I would make that a condition of the agreement of sale. Pending approval of all disclosures. That's part of your agreement of sale. Another additional term, that's probably the only one you're going to run into. There could be some other things freaky to come up that I don't want to get thrown into conversation because they most likely won't come up. But again, if something comes up that is out of the norm that you're not comfortable with, you can always pick up the phone. And then you would just want to make sure it gets executed properly. These are all the things that your buyer should have received, either the consumer notice before you've written anything. That's one of the first documents they get. Estimated closing costs either before or with the offer, not after. Deposit money notice with the offer. If they have not received the lead-based disclosure yet, you can't have them initial that. You have to leave that blank because they haven't gotten it yet. But they'll see, anyone will see up above, pending approval of all disclosures. I always do the pamphlet itself too, which is like, I don't know, a 16-page book. I have it as a PDF. I drop that into my room. And when I go to have them DocuSign things, I have them sign on the last page. There's this big white block. I have them sign that says, here's a lead-based paint brochure. You've received it. Now, whether you read it or not, I can't help that. But at least you're signed that you've received it. That's a great way of protecting yourself from anyone coming back at you. So that's the quick version, I guess, compared to Vicky, because her class is like an hour and a half. But Vicky gives a lot of little stories on things that have happened and why these changes have been made, which I think stories are very helpful. So I think that's why she does that. And I think her class is definitely something every agent should watch, even here and there, even veteran agents should once in a while just go and you're gonna take a class like that, maybe take it in 15, 20-minute segments, digest it, and then maybe go back and watch some more. If you try to watch that whole video, start to finish, you're gonna miss half of it, I think, at least for me. Video learning and Zoom learning is not my forte. I'd rather be in person. I just think it's much more effective. On the Zoom class, a lot of times it's hard to kind of get the questions in there because you're like, let's just kind of see what happens. So now that we've gone through it, on a pretty quick pace, I would say, is there a particular section that anyone wants to review? Is there any questions anyone has about a particular section or something I may have said that you went, I haven't heard that before. I didn't quite understand that. Does anybody have anything they want to review from that point of view? I'm not seeing any yeses. I'm just seeing a lot of stares. Of course, I'm seeing Robin's camera because hers isn't working. So we're all good? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so I think since we're at 10:30, that should pretty much do it. And then I guess we'll pick up either me or Sean or probably Dana will pick up next week on the rest of this on questions that come up. Sound good?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you,
and Emerald,
Michael. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome. And Emerald, you're going to submit that offer today?
Yes, I'm going to submit the offer today. They actually needed it in pen via versus DocuSign. So I had to print everything out and actually.
Oh, that's right. You needed a hard signature. So on short sales, when an agent tells you they need wet signatures, that means you can't have it DocuSign. You're going to have to print all the documents and have your client physically initial and sign and date everything, which you can then take and send them a PDF, which sounds funny because now they're getting a photocopy, but they can tell the difference between a hard signature or wet signature versus electronic, because electronic has that goofy code.
Let's see.
So if you run into a short sale situation, just keep in mind. And the one thing I asked Emerald, and she was, I think, a little surprised by the question, was sometimes the instructions from the short sale company will specify blue or black ink. So if you do it in the wrong color ink, they won't take it. So that's why I asked that question. So other than that, sounds like we're good. I'll be around if you have any questions. Sound good?
Thank
All right,
you.
everybody. Thanks. See you all.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.